Hello, this is Vesta Copestakes, and I publish the Sonoma County Gazette. You can find the Gazette at more than 1,000 locations throughout Sonoma County in the print edition and online at sonomacountygazette.com. And you can find me on Facebook, which is where most of the really interesting conversations are going on. Politics is really busy right now, and it's the national politics, but a lot of it has to do with local politics. So when we get into local politics, we talk a lot about issues that impact our personal lives. Things like living wage, housing. Housing is huge. Environmental issues. Stuff that's coming on to the ballot in November has been really a hot topic of conversation. Things that I have attended recently, meetings, public meetings, have a lot to do with environmental issues, community separators. Let's just chat on community separators for a moment because it's a really big one coming up. 20 years ago, Sonoma County had the forethought to establish a community separator, a mandate basically, that says we don't want to become San Jose North. And so we designated lands, open space lands, agricultural lands, park lands, to be the things that keep one community from melding into the next one. It became our signature because it made this community, Sonoma County, a beautiful place to live and a beautiful place to visit. So now, 20 years later, the community separator mandate is come to a close, and we had to decide as a county if we wanted to continue this. Now, if we don't continue it, chances are every piece of open land that's not currently developed would be up for grabs, and realtors would want to grab it. Excuse me, I have an itchy nose. And so we had these public hearings and discussions, articles in the Gazette. The Sonoma County Open Space initiative became a big discussion for green belts. They're called green belts. And we wanted to decide whether you're going to keep the same green belts that we currently have, or we want to increase the green belts that we currently have. So what the county decided to do through much discussion and what is called Permit and Resource Development Department is the PRMD. PRMD did a huge study on which kind of lands would be appropriate to add to these green belts and open spaces. And so what they did was they added a bunch of them up north in Cloverdale and down south in Rohnert Park, Cotati, Pengrove, and Petaluma, and expanded a few of them here in the Santa Rosa Central Plain. A lot of these open spaces don't really apply to farther east and farther west, although they did add some in Sonoma. And what the county supervisors decided was that they were going to approve most of the details of what PRMD came forward with, of the land acquisitions, for saying that these are open green spaces for Sonoma County going forth. And they are much larger than they were before. We have many more acres that are on this mandate that is coming on the ballot in the fall. And so some of the people, a few property owners objected, but the vast majority said this is fine. And there are the two aspects that are available to us are just plain old open space that turns into parks and open space that is used for agriculture. Agriculture is a huge one. The wine industry, small farms, large farms are part of these open spaced areas. And so some of the land that is open space that is agricultural is used in a way that actually generates income and jobs for the county. Other parts are the parks, and that is another thing that's going to be coming onto the ballot this fall. And the parks are only part of the open spaces, not all of them. So it's not all public access land. A lot of it has to do with just being an open space. And everybody pretty much agreed, who was involved in this, that we want to keep these open spaces, these green spaces, because it's part of why it's such a joy to live here and why people come all over the planet to visit Sonoma County. Tourism is one of our largest businesses. It supplies income to thousands of people in Sonoma County. So if we were to fill in all these spaces and have housing developments, shopping centers, industrial parks, say all along the 101 corridor, there would be less people who would want to be here and come here and visit. And it would also be a less pleasant place to live, and the air pollution, of course, would increase dramatically. So on the November ballot is the initiative to continue with the open spaces and the green belt initiative. And it's the green belt initiative was first we said, oh, let's go for 30 years. Oh, it's a wonderful thing, we'll go for 30 years. But everybody said, that's too far out. We might actually want to we might want to change something in 20 years. So it was a 20-year initiative to continue another 20 years and is on the ballot coming in November. It's just one of the many things. This is going to be an extremely busy ballot. So that's all happened in this last month. And in this last week, we added on to the concept of Sonoma County Regional Parks. Sonoma County Regional Parks wants to put an additional half-cent sales tax only for unincorporated areas, not for the incorporated cities. All the cities are Petaluma, Cotati, Rohnert Park, Santa Rosa, Sonoma, Cloverdale, Healdsburg, Windsor. Those are these cities. Everywhere else would get the half-cent sales tax, but not in the cities. And one of the logic and reasoning around this is that people buy high-ticket items in those cities, things like cars and computers and furniture and things like that. So that half-cent sales tax could be a detriment to people's ability to buy things. So in the unincorporated areas, it's mostly food and entertainment, and food is not a taxable entity. The kind of food that you eat for survival, because sodas are a taxable entity, potato chips are a taxable entity. It's very interesting how these things all break out. So on the ballot, again, is a half-cent sales tax for unincorporated areas to keep our parks going. And one of the aspects of that is that when the Coastal Commission said they wanted to have people pay fees out at our coastal parks, that people came forward and said, don't do this. That's going to make it so that coastal parks with services, which are stairs, parking lots, bathrooms, that kind of thing, services that people need, would end up costing money for people who can't afford it. You'll get a family who will pile all into a car, go in and pay one $6 fee to park that car, and then have a really good time on the coast. And these are people who oftentimes live in the city. They don't get respite from buildings and air conditioners and concrete and loud noise. So going to the coast is calming and highly entertaining, especially for families with children. And so to take that away from them, and what would also happen is it would force them onto the beaches that are free. And those beaches that are free tend to not have parking, bathrooms, maintain trails. That's a little more dangerous for children, and also means that, well, where are people going to pee and poo, quite frankly. So it becomes an issue of okay, how do we keep our parks on the coast free? So Sonoma County Regional Parks came in and said, we will work with the state to keep our parks, our coastal beaches free. So they've taken on more responsibility, and that more responsibility needs to be paid for, basically, because it's a lot to maintain these parks. One of the things that happens out on the coast is that the ocean and the waves and the wind erode trails that go down to the beach, because our beaches are not go out in a big old sandy beach, park near it, and go as one down at the entrance, Jenner, down the entrance to the ocean where the Richland River goes out into the sea. But all the other ones, it's like you're on a cliff and you've got to get down to the beach. So those stairs need to be maintained, and they get beat up both by people and by weather. Rain washes things out. They take a lot of maintenance. So this half-cent sales tax makes a lot of sense for people who want to keep the beaches free and want to have access to parks. One of the things that's happening with our parks is we're increasing our parks, and it's not just because of that whole green open space initiative. It's because, Carol Hart, who is quite a parks junkie, she's the person who runs Sonoma County Regional Parks, and she loves these parks. So when Sonoma County acquires more land and decides that it's going to be a park, it's going to have public access, then Sonoma County Regional Parks is the one that takes it over and makes it have public access. There's lands owned by Open Space District, land paths, and things like Mayacamas area that are open preserved lands, but you don't get to go on them unless you get a particular pass or you pass a course that says you can do these trails, various things like that. They have special events. You can get onto these parks, but only the Sonoma County Regional Parks and the state parks are available to everyone all the time. And each of the state parks and regional parks also has park pass programs. People tend to not buy those park passes. You kind of wish they would, because if they did, it would help pay for these parks. But a lot of people just don't. Let's see, I'm a senior now, so my park pass is $39 a year. $39. That's not a lot of money. You can go out to a restaurant and pay that for a meal and a glass of wine or beer. So that's access to all the parks in Sonoma County, and I think it's $69 for regular families. The whole family, park pass, your car, there you go. or you pay $7 each time you go to a park. So look, if you go to parks a lot, it's really cost effective. So that's one of the things that's on the ballot this fall. And one of the things that we really need to be paying attention to. Do we want these parks? Do we want these open spaces? Do we want to have green belts? Do we want to continue being the county that has brought people to us? And why is our air so clean? Because we have lots of trees that clean the air. So it's something I personally, obviously, am really supportive of, and I hope you are as well. One of the meetings I went to this last week at Board of Supervisors, every Tuesday, it's totally open to everyone. They have they call consent calendar items, and they publish a whole agenda of what they're dealing with every week on their website. That's sonoma-county.org. You go to the Board of Supervisors, and their agenda is there for everybody to see. And so one of the things that they dealt with this week was the Atascadero wetlands. That's something that has an article actually in this Gazette, the August Gazette, and also there was an article in the July Gazette dealing with the Atascadero wetlands. Now, what I didn't realize is how few wetlands are preserved in Sonoma County. It's really not that many that are actually preserved. This one happens to be on the Atascadero Creek, and it runs west of Grayton, west of Forestville, Grayton, and Sebastopol, and it runs all along in this valley, this lovely valley that floods a lot in the wintertime. And there are vineyards on both sides of it, and there are houses on both sides of it, and it's been suffering from drought, but also from people pumping water to irrigate vineyards to use for their houses and all the rest of it. So people who are in the area, this is one of the things I love about Sonoma County, is people become very passionate about protecting something. So people said, we want to protect this wetlands. And one of the things I didn't realize, this particular wetlands is a very powerful water recharge area. So when it rains, the water comes down and goes deep, deep, deep into the earth in this location, and it recharges the groundwater system. Now, if you go into Santa Rosa, it's not just the concrete and asphalt that's covering the earth that is keeping the water from recharging the groundwater. It's also that there is a hard pan of rock and it's most clay, hard soil that is underneath everything that we live in, that the water simply hits and stops. It never makes it down into the groundwater. So all of the areas in Sonoma County that are groundwater recharge systems are extremely important to our water supply as we move into the future. So there it is, the Board of Supervisors. They have to decide what they're going to do. And there's the people who want to protect it. And there's the farmers who say we should be able to do what we want to do with the vineyards. And so lovely as our Board of Supervisors tends to be, they came to a nice compromise. Originally, they wanted 189 acres, I believe it was, protected. And then they said they could get away with 152, I think it was, acres of protecting this wetland area. Partly it is some of the vineyards that already exist can basically replant, do whatever they want, but it had to do with, could you plant new ones? Could you continue planting? And one of the things I found especially interesting is this area is prone to floods in winter. And I had attended a meeting in the fall that had to do with a bridge that goes over one of these roads. And that bridge washes out in the wintertime. And the winter before last, it washed out really bad. I mean, the whole thing just crumbled to pieces. And one of the reasons why is because the creek that comes through there has filled up with silt over the years. And so the water just kept getting higher and higher and higher. And no matter what they did with the bridge, which they had at one point repaired and replaced and raised it up, the earth underneath it also raised it up. And why did it do that? Because agricultural lands alongside of it had been farmed for so long that the silt would come off of the earth and fill up these creeks. Now, back in the old days, the farmers used to dredge the creeks to keep that from happening. But we have environmental standards and rules now. We have what are called riparian protections, and riparian means a waterway, basically. So we have rules and regs established over the last decade or two that says you can't mess with this land. So along the edges of the creeks are willows and brush and blackberries and trees and all kinds of things that keep the water from eroding the banks, and then also keep the silt from coming in and filling it up, and also create gravel and places where fish can lay eggs. So in trying to establish our waterways for fish and for wildlife, we've protected these areas. And in that, we still have all the ramifications of previous historic farming practices and various things like that that have left a lot of silt in these waterways. And over time, the waterways are healing themselves. The people are coming along and really caring for it. It's a community-based protection and restoration in concert with nature. So what a wonderful thing this is. So over time, this waterway and this whole wetlands is going to repair itself with the help of human beings to get to a place where it's healthy for humans, for fish, and for water. It's a wonderful thing, and that's one of the things that happened this last week. So one of the things that's the issues that is really huge in Sonoma County right now that is coming up again in this election is housing issues. And affordable housing, everybody talks about affordable housing. It's pretty serious. One of those things that occurred during when the downturn in the economy and people were going into foreclosure with all their homes, there were very wealthy people holding onto lots of cash who went in and simply bought the houses that people had lost. And they did minor restorations to major restorations depending, and then they rent those houses out. They aren't necessarily selling those houses, they're renting them out. So the average rent right now in Sonoma County is $1,600 for an apartment or a house. That is so much money that people can't afford to rent houses. So sometimes what they do is they all gather together and they share houses. You'll find a lot of young people will do that. And then sometimes they become homeless because they can't afford these things, or they're forced to live in apartment complexes with no yards, small children, not a good mix. So Sonoma County is trying to deal with how do we handle this housing crisis in light of the fact that some of these neighborhoods have no nice family neighborhood has no affordable housing for people to rent. If you want to buy the house, you can buy the house. But at this point, they say medium house price is $600,000. That seems like an extraordinary amount of money. You can still find a house for $400,000. That seems like a lot of money when you have to come up with a 20%, 15 to 20% down payment. There are all kinds of programs that will allow you to come up with 0, 1 to 5% of the down payment. But what that happens is, if you're supposed to be comfortable with your income, you're supposed to only spend 30% of your income on the roof over your head. Now, my entire life, that never happened. I was always at 40, 50% forever, and it's still the case. So, but if the roof over your head is important to you, you're willing to do that. And the nice thing about owning a house versus renting one is that, for one thing, you can tear out walls if you want to, which I really like to do, if it's not a load-bearing wall. But it's yours, and you get the tax deduction, and you get to there's so many things you can do if you own a house as opposed to renting. When you rent a house, you're paying someone else's mortgage. That's kind of nasty. It doesn't feel good. So Sonoma County has lots of ways to allow people to buy houses, but some of them are like Burbank Housing. Burbank Housing, you do sweat equity to build a brand new house. Well, let's say you don't want to build a brand new house. You actually want to own one that's already existing. So one of my big mantras when I go to these meetings is to say, could we rebuild neighborhoods that already exist? People already live there. They like their neighborhoods. They like where they live. Could we go in and help people rebuild their houses and restore their houses without costing them an arm and a leg, and without having them to go through some major refinancing thing through a bank or a loan company? Maybe the county can help with this in some way. So that's one of the things that's under consideration right now. And then the other one is called SDUs, and you'll see an article in the July edition and the August edition of the Gazette on SDUs. Those are called secondary dwelling units. This one, the tiny house issue, is poised and ready to start happening. Healdsburg's working on it. There's a program in Santa Cruz that already does this with SDUs. And what it does is, especially for, say, people who are elderly people who've been living in a neighborhood all their lives, their house is paid for, or it still might have a mortgage. It's too big for them. Sometimes there's only 1 or 2 people left. The kids left. It's a 4-bedroom house. What the heck are they going to do with this big house with a double-car garage, right? They feel forced to move because it's too expensive for them. SDUs, and if this gets passed in Healdsburg and other cities, and if it can become a countywide issue, people will be able to build apartments in their existing structure of their house. So let's say it's a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom house. They'll take 1 or 2 bedrooms. They'll take one of those bathrooms and they'll add a kitchen to it, give it its own entrance and its own parking, and they've got an apartment inside their house in the place where they've lived all their lives. So what it is called infill housing. And that infill housing is a wonderful thing for neighborhoods, for people who can't afford to rent something. Maybe it's $600, maybe it's $800 a month, maybe it's $1,000 a month. It's still cheaper than $1,600 a month. And it totally allows someone who already lives in that house to stay in that house. And that is a sweetness. And if you start thinking about things like, well, there's that old lady down the street, and what is she doing in that great big house all by herself? She wouldn't mind actually having a family there. Maybe she has a daughter or son somewhere else who has grandchildren somewhere else. She never sees them anymore. Maybe a small family or single mother, single father moves into her house, and she's got little kids around again. And she can watch those little kids and play with those little kids, and she can be grandmother. Surrogate grandparents are wonderful for people to have. They're good for parents because they get respite. They're good for the grandparents because you get to play with little kids and they make us laugh, and I can tell you I love that immensely myself. And they are good for the family who can't afford something else. And so these SDUs, secondary dwelling units, are coming on to our ballots, are coming into the cities in terms of, I don't expect it to be on a ballot initiative yet in terms of, can you vote on this in November? Probably not. But in 2017, this one's going to start rising to the top. And one of the things that's part of this is those tiny houses. And you keep hearing about these tiny houses, especially you hear about them in terms of housing homeless people. The county is now going to put a small development of tiny houses on the corner of Mendocino and Chenate in what is now a giant flat area with gravel and a fence around it. Rather unpleasant, but it's an experiment. And just like, maybe you've heard of Camp McKella, which is a tent city basically over in Roseland that the Community Development Commission has been basically supporting with trash service, water service, toilet service. And how does it work? How do these people live together in a small community, make rules and regs, and do it in a way that everybody gets along and it functions and it's self-maintaining and what do they call it there, when someone basically controls their own rules and regs and everybody does it and takes care of each other and works together in a village community, tiny thing. And that one works sometimes and it doesn't work sometimes. And one of the issues that is always an issue with our homeless communities, if you want to call them communities, because a lot of them are just a group of tents, is that lots of these homeless tent areas are people with mental illness problems, drug and alcohol problems. So they need a lot of services. And one of the things that our county is going to try to do is to give more services to some of these people. So one of the things you really try to do with mental illness and instability is to create stability. If you can create some stability in someone's life, you can change their life. So if you have someone who is mentally unstable or who has drug and alcohol problems, and if you actually give them something that feels consistent, where they go to bed at night in the same place, where they surround themselves with their own personal possessions, where they feel they have self-worth in some way, and you build their self-esteem, that gives them enough strength to, say, go through a drug rehab program, an alcohol rehab program. It's a marvelous thing, because some of these homeless shelters and homeless programs insist that people be dry, which means that they're straight. They've already gone through the program. Other ones will allow them to be wet, which means they're allowed to take drugs and alcohol, and they try to work within that system. But things like Camp McKella has a very interesting system. Within the fence, you have to behave well. You can have your dog and all the rest of it. You have to behave well. It doesn't mean you have to be straight, but it means that you do your drugs and alcohol outside the fence line, and when you come in, you are well behaved. So a lot of these new facilities and these tiny house things are going to require the same thing, which is you just got to behave yourself, work within the system. It's all baby steps. All these things are baby steps. Part two, preserve our home, to make our home keep being clean and green and a lovely place to live. To provide housing for people. Will it work? Maybe yes, maybe no. We'll find out. To house homeless people, especially as we're getting towards winter when it's really an issue. Can you imagine living in a tent or in the street or in a sleeping bag, sleeping underneath a bridge, trying to stay dry? Just go ahead and try it. When I did the creek cleanups up in Healdsburg, I was blown away. Pouring rain, people underneath bridges in tiny little spaces, thoroughly dirty, and trying to dry their clothes. Seriously, pretty hard. So it's all towards all of these things are towards maintaining our home, making our home a better place to live, for not just people with money or middle class people or poor working people, but for everyone. And may seem like, okay, so this word socialism comes up all the time in politics. What it is we are our brother's keeper. There are things that we can do that benefit everyone. And one of the things that we can do is to provide home for people. And if we can do this in a way that they provide their own home and therefore they get the self-esteem and the benefits of providing their own home instead of handouts from the government, all the rest of it, it's a real serious benefit to us as a society and as a community and as the keepers of our home. So anyway, the August edition of the Gazette is out on newsstands now and up on our website, SonomaCountyGazette.com. If you want to find a Gazette, you can go to our website, SonomaCountyGazette.com, and there's a full list of all the locations where you can find the Gazette in the print edition. And we will continue covering these issues, including one of my favorites right now is, I live in the 5th District, and our supervisor is, Efren Carrillo is no longer going to be our supervisor. He's not running. It is down to 2 women who will be running for this position, Noreen Evans and Linda Hopkins. And so I have asked them 3 questions, which they are answering in print and online, which they did in the August edition. And now I have 3 more questions, one of those being SDUs, the secondary dwelling units, another one being about the marijuana cannabis initiative that is coming up in the fall on the November ballot. So that'll be interesting to see how they answer that one. And I got another question, and it's totally escaping my brain at the moment. So that will be in the September edition, which will be out August 31st and September 1st. And of course, you can always check us out online. And on Facebook, I would recommend getting to be part of the discussion on Facebook. Sonoma County Gazette has, what do you do at facebook.com/Sonoma well, you just put in Sonoma County Gazette up in that little bar, and you'll find that, and you'll get to be part of the discussion. They get some pretty heated discussions up on this thing. It gets pretty exciting. So be part of the solution. Be part of our lives. Be part of our community. It's a wonderful thing. I'm totally into it. That's my motto: building community. So please join us. SonomaCountyGazette.com. I'm Vesta Copesticks, and I'm signing out for now.